Welcome back, listeners, to Occult Archives.
Where we explore.
Yeah, where we get into the nitty-gritty of
That's
the myths and legends behind some of history's
most feared.
books.
Right.
We're not talking about, your average spooky tales or urban legends here. This is
Okay.
about cracking open those texts that have been deliberately kept hidden.
Right.
The ones that have been whispered about for centuries, often considered, too powerful, too dangerous for just anyone to read.
Indeed, forbidden wisdom.
Exactly.
And that's precisely where our journey takes us today.
Yeah, today we're diving deep into The Voice of the Silence by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky,
Published in 1889.
1889. And for those of you who want to follow along, Global Gray released the ebook on February 24th, 2025.
Right.
Now, we're not dealing with just another philosophical text here. Blavatsky claimed that The Voice of the Silence is actually drawn from a much older, more esoteric work called the Book of the Golden Precepts.
A fundamental text.
Fundamental, yeah, for mystical students, particularly in the East.
Mm-hmm.
It's a text that's been used for centuries, really, to guide initiates on their spiritual journey.
So what's fascinating here is the lineage that's attributed to this Book of the Golden Precepts.
Okay, so talk to me about the lineage. Where does this thing come from?
It is said to have come from the same source as the stanzas of the Book of Gian,
Right, which is, of course, what?
the very foundation of Blavatsky's secret doctrine.
Right, the cornerstone of her whole system.
It's also linked, some say, to the Paramartha,
Paramartha, okay.
a mystical work said to have been given to the sage Nagarjuna by the Nagas.
By the Nagas. Now, who were they?
These are the ancient serpent beings.
Right, these ancient serpent beings, these initiates, said to hold this vast hidden knowledge.
Right. So essentially we're dealing with a text, The Voice of the Silence, that situates itself within this really ancient and interconnected mystical tradition.
Right. So for listeners out there who, like me, are super intrigued by this, but maybe a little intimidated by the thought of tackling the secret doctrine head on.
It is quite dense.
Yeah, it is. This deep dive is for you. It's like a shortcut to understanding the core ideas without getting bogged down in the complexity of the original texts.
Exactly. We're aiming for clarity here.
Clarity, absolutely. Now, we should remember that the Book of the Golden Precepts itself is not a small work.
Oh, no. It's said to contain about 90 different treatises.
90 treatises, and Blavatsky herself claimed to have memorized 39 of them.
Quite a feat.
That's pretty impressive. So that gives you an idea of the sheer scope of the material we're dealing with.
Indeed. A vast intellectual and spiritual landscape.
So our mission today is to distill the essential wisdom of the Voice of the Silence.
We're going to look at how Blavatsky presents these teachings.
Yeah, how she, guides us toward accessing inner wisdom, the challenges on the path to spiritual enlightenment, and the tests one faces along the way.
The obstacles on the road to liberation.
Exactly. Are you ready to start unpacking this?
I am.
All right, let's jump right in.
We begin with Fragment 1.
Right.
It's actually titled The Voice of the Silence.
Appropriately.
Blavatsky specifies that these initial teachings are meant for those who are, and I quote, ignorant of the dangers of the lower IDDHI.
So what does that mean exactly? Lower IDDHI.
This refers to the lower psychic powers.
The more basic, undeveloped ones.
Precisely. Right from the start, she's distinguishing between different levels of spiritual unfolding, different kinds of psychic abilities.
So it sounds like this first part is laying the groundwork for what true inner work should look like.
Exactly. And the ultimate aim here is to learn to hear and understand the voice of Nāda.
Now, what is Nāda?
It's described as the soundless sound, a bit paradoxical.
A soundless sound. That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It is. It points to a level of perception that goes beyond our ordinary hearing.
Right, a deeper kind of resonance.
And to achieve this, one has to master what's called dharana.
Dharana. Okay, tell me more about that.
It's a state of intense mental concentration.
Like a laser focus.
Exactly. A complete withdrawal of attention from the external world.
Shutting out the noise.
All the sensory inputs that constantly bombard us.
So basically, silencing the mind to hear the soundless sound.
Precisely. And this is where things get interesting, because the text talks about slaying the mind.
Slaying the mind. That sounds a bit drastic.
It does. Blavatsky refers to it as the great slayer of the real.
So is the mind the enemy here?
In a sense, yes. It's the part of us that clings to illusions, that prevents us from seeing reality as it truly is.
She uses a really powerful metaphor here, listeners, to illustrate this point. Waking from a dream.
It's a common analogy across different spiritual traditions.
Right, the idea that the forms and experiences we perceive, the reality we take for granted, are like the fleeting images in a dream.
Impermanent and ultimately unreal.
So this detachment from the senses goes even deeper.
The text says that before the soul can truly perceive, inner harmony has to be attained.
Inner harmony, yeah.
And our fleshly eyes, our physical senses, have to be made blind to illusion.
Blind to illusion. So what does that look like in practice?
It's like becoming unaffected by the loudest noises and the subtlest whispers,
Tuning out the external world completely,
to the point where you're equally indifferent to all sensory input.
like a kind of spiritual sensory deprivation.
In a way, yes. The idea is to quiet the external clamor so you can hear that voice of the silence within.
It reminds me of trying to tune a radio to pick up a faint but important signal.
That's a good analogy,
You have to eliminate all the static.
to hear the message clearly.
Exactly. Now, the text offers another great analogy to explain this process. The potter and the clay.
The clay has to be completely surrendered to the potter's hands.
To take form,
Similarly, the soul has to unite with the silent speaker within.
which I guess is that divine spark, that higher self.
That's one way to understand it. And through this union, we gain true understanding and remembrance
Remembrance of what?
of our true nature, of who we really are beyond the illusions.
So how do we know if our soul is still too caught up in the earthly realm?
The text gives us some signs. If your soul still smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life,
Okay.
if it sings within her chrysalis of flesh and matter,
Or even...
or even if it weeps inside her castle of illusion.
So even joy and sorrow can be indicators.
Exactly, because there's still reactions to the external world, to the realm of illusion.
Right. It's not about rejecting joy or sorrow, but about seeing beyond those temporary states.
To a deeper, more stable state of being,
Right. The text contrasts this with the idea of an unworthy shrine
where the soul is easily distracted by worldly turmoil.
and tends to run from pain rather than facing it head on.
This sets the stage for the introduction of the three halls.
Right. The three halls leading to the cessation of our struggles.
Ignorance, learning, and wisdom.
So like a journey of understanding.
But each hall has its own dangers.
Okay, so let's break this down. What about the first hall? The hall of ignorance. What are we dealing with there?
The first hall, avidya, is where we start.
Right. Deeply immersed in the illusion of separateness.
And the biggest danger here, lust. The fires of lust.
So mistaking fleeting desires for true fulfillment.
Yeah, chasing after those temporary highs without realizing that true happiness lies elsewhere.
And then we move on to the hall of learning. Sounds more promising, right?
It does, but it's also dangerous.
What's the trap in the hall of learning?
Here, the soul encounters the blossoms of life.
That sounds pleasant enough.
It does, but the text warns us that under every flower, a serpent coiled.
Oh,
This represents the astral plane.
the astral plane. Right, that realm of psychic experiences.
It's full of seductive illusions.
Seductive, but ultimately misleading.
It's like being lured into a beautiful garden full of exotic flowers.
That turn out to be poisonous.
In a way, yes. The text warns against seeking the true guru in these regions.
So you can't find authentic guidance in the astral plane.
Not according to Blavatsky.
The true teachers aren't hanging out there.
No. The wise ones, they don't linger in the pleasure grounds.
They're not interested in those fleeting delights.
We're right. They're not fooled by the siren song of illusion.
So where do we find the true guru?
In the hall of wisdom,
That's the realm beyond the shadows.
where the light of truth shines.
And how do we get there? How do we enter the hall of wisdom?
First, we have to shed the dark garments of illusion.
Okay, strip away the illusions. What else?
We have to silence the senses. Stop letting those images cloud our vision.
Turn down the volume on the external world.
The goal is to blend with the uncreated essence within.
To merge with that pure, eternal part of ourselves.
Exactly. And once we've recognized our own fundamental ignorance, our ajnana,
We have to reject the allure of the hall of learning.
no matter how tempting it might seem.
It's like realizing that the most beautiful garden can also be the most dangerous.
The hall of learning has a perfidious beauty.
It's necessary for a time, but we can't get stuck there.
Blavatsky warns against being dazzled by the jewel of the great ensnarer,
Who is the great ensnarer?
Mara.
Mara. Okay, remind us who Mara is.
He's the personification of temptation.
The embodiment of our own vices.
Literally, that which kills the soul.
So we're talking about some serious spiritual danger here.
His seductive light blinds the undisciplined mind.
Leading to what?
leaving the soul as an abandoned wreck.
So what happens to the souls who get caught in this trap?
The text paints a vivid picture. They're tossed on the stormy sea of human life,
At the mercy of the waves.
swept away by the first great vortex.
That's a pretty intense image. So how do we avoid this fate?
By closing our senses to the great dire heresy of separateness.
The belief that we're isolated, cut off from everything else.
Exactly. That's the fundamental illusion that keeps us trapped in suffering.
We have to break free from that.
To reach the veil of bliss,
And that's the realm of true liberation.
the state of unity with the Ao.
So how do we bridge this perceived separation? How do we get from this feeling of isolation to that state of unity?
By merging the heaven-born, the individual soul, back into the universal parent, the soul.
So it's about reunification?
Yes, a return to the source.
And how do we achieve that?
By retiring the fiery power into the chamber of the heart.
The fiery power, that's Kundalini, right?
Yes, the serpent power.
So it's about awakening and raising this energy.
Consciously directing it to the heart center, Brahmapura.
Brahmapura. And what happens there?
From there, it ascends to the sixth, the middle region, between the eyebrows.
Okay.
And there it becomes the breath of the one soul,
The master's voice.
the voice of the higher self.
So by raising this energy, we gain access to the guidance of our higher self.
And this allows one to become a walker of the sky,
A Kachara, someone who can tread the winds above the turbulent waters.
unaffected by the storms below.
So achieving a state of transcendence, but there's more to it than that, right?
Right. Before reaching the top of the ladder of mystic sounds,
What's that?
it's a metaphor for the stages of spiritual realization.
Okay, so before reaching the top of this ladder.
We have to learn to hear the voice of our inner God in 7 different ways.
7 ways. What are they?
It starts subtly, like the nightingale's sweet voice.
Okay.
Then it becomes more resonant. The second is like the silver symbol of the
The
Dhyanis.
celestial beings.
Right. Then, the melodious plaint of the ocean sprite, the intricate chant of Vina, the piercing shrill of a bamboo flute, a powerful trumpet blast,
So the sounds are getting progressively louder and more intense.
and finally, the dull rumbling of a thundercloud.
That's quite a range.
Yeah.
What happens after that?
The 7th sound swallows all the other sounds.
They all merge into one.
You can no longer distinguish them as separate entities.
So even these subtle sounds eventually dissolve.
It signifies a transcendence of all those inner experiences.
Okay.
Then the text says, when the 6 are overcome,
The 6 what?
the 6 lower principles,
The senses that bind us to the material world?
when they're slain and laid at the master's feet, the pupil merges into the one,
Becoming one with the ultimate reality.
and dwelling within it eternally.
It's like dissolving into the ocean of pure consciousness.
That's one way to put it. But before we can even embark on this path, there are some important purifications we need to undertake.
What kind of purifications?
The destruction of the lunar body, the Kamarupa,
Okay, so destroying the part of us driven by desires.
cleansing the mind body, the Manasarupa.
And purifying the heart.
The text uses some vivid analogies to emphasize this point.
Like what?
It says the pure waters of life cannot mingle with the muddy torrents of passion.
Right. Like oil and water.
And a dewdrop from heaven, pure while on a lotus leaf, becomes mere clay when it falls to earth.
So the potential for the spiritual to be contaminated by the material.
Even a pearl, if unguarded, can become a speck of mire.
So any unpurified aspects within us will hinder our progress.
They prevent us from merging with the higher self,
We have to root out those impurities. And that includes our thoughts, right?
especially our thoughts. The text warns against unclean thoughts.
Even their shadows can be harmful.
Right. We have to use our thoughts consciously, not let them control us.
So it's about mental discipline, taming the mind.
Precisely. The mystic power, the Kundalini, requires us to slay the lunar form at will.
That lower, desire-driven self.
It highlights the incompatibility of matter and spirit.
They can't coexist. One has to give way to the other.
And that means crushing the bud of personality
The ego.
and destroying the worm of sense beyond resurrection.
It's about more than just walking the path. It's about becoming the path itself.
Exactly. And this is where compassion comes in.
Compassion.
The text says we should listen to every cry of pain,
To be sensitive to the suffering of others.
just as the lotus opens its heart to the sun.
So our own spiritual progress is linked to how we treat others.
We shouldn't let a single tear of suffering dry before we try to wipe it away.
Because even those tears serve a purpose.
They irrigate the fields of charity immortal.
And that's where the midnight blossom of Buddha can grow.
The flower of adeptship.
So we're not just striving for personal liberation here.
It's about something bigger.
We're working toward the liberation of all beings.
And that requires us to kill desire, Tana.
Not because we want to live forever as individuals.
But to replace those fleeting desires with something lasting.
To desire nothing for ourselves. To accept karma.
To struggle only with the personal, the transient.
And what happens when we do that?
The text says that by helping nature,
by working in harmony with it,
we become co-creators with nature.
We gain access to its secret chambers.
Its hidden treasures.
Treasures that are only visible to the eye of spirit.
And nature in turn will reveal the way to the 7 gates.
The gates leading to the ultimate goal.
The goal that's bathed in the sunlight of the spirit.
It sounds like a reciprocal relationship. We serve nature and it guides us.
It's about working in harmony with the universe.
And the first fragment ends by telling us that there's only one road to the path.
And at its end, the voice of the silence.
But it's not an easy path.
No. Suffering is the ladder we have to climb.
And it's through virtue that we silence the painful rungs.
We can't let any vice hinder our progress.
Not even one.
Otherwise, we risk falling into the mire of our sins.
So we have to purify ourselves before we even take the first step.
We have to bathe our feet in the waters of renunciation.
Otherwise, we'll just pollute the ladder.
And our vices will take shape. Our sins will raise their voices.
Our thoughts will become a captive army.
So, silence the thoughts.
Focus on the unseen master within.
Merge the senses into one.
That's how we find the steep path.
The path revealed by the hidden sense in the brain.
And don't dwell on the past.
No looking back.
Because it'll just make the climb harder.
And remember, lust can't be killed by gratification.
You can't fight fire with fire.
It's like the rose in the bud.
Or the golden tree with jewel buds.
It's about returning to a state of purity.
Regaining that childlike innocence.
The unfading golden light of spirit can illuminate us.
But only if we prepare ourselves.
The body must be passive, the mind calm.
Cool head.
And the soul firm and pure.
Then we can hear the mystic sounds.
And seeing and hearing are interconnected.
They work together.
The 4 senses blend into the 5th, inner touch.
Leading to the 4th stage.
And in the 5th stage, we kill all the senses.
Beyond reanimation.
Then we reach Dharana,
the 6th stage.
Where the mind is withdrawn from all images.
No more external perceptions, no more internal thoughts.
And finally, the 7th stage.
Where we no longer perceive the sacred 3 as separate.
We become that 3.
Like inseparable twins, guided by the star of initiation.
The 3 ineffable lose their names, becoming one fire that scorches not.
That's dhyana.
And then the self is lost in the self, merged in that self.
Samadhi, the drop returning to the ocean.
The yogi becomes both doer and witness.
Light and sound.
And then there are the 5 impediments.
The obstacles we have to overcome.
And by conquering them, we become the master of the 6th.
The deliverer of the 4 noble truths.
The truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path.
So we have to experience misery firsthand.
Conquer Mara's king at sea.
Destroy the roots of sin.
And enter Tao.
A path itself.
And finally, we rest beneath the Bodhi tree.
Perfection of knowledge.
Becoming the master of Samatya.
With faultless vision.
And then the ultimate realization.
We become the light, the sound, the master, God.
The I-8 self, the object of your search.
The unbroken voice. Tet Set.
That concludes the first fragment.
Wow. That's a lot to take in.
It is a dense and profound teaching.
But let's move on to Fragment Teller, the 2 paths.
Here we encounter the teacher of compassion.
Guiding others toward liberation.
And the candidates plead for the doctrine of the heart.
So a shift toward helping others.
Right. And we're introduced to the 2 paths.
Okay.
The 3 great perfections.
And the 6 transforming virtues.
The question is, who can understand these 2 paths as one?
The secret of the secret heart.
And the law teaches wisdom by shunning mere learning.
Revealing the underlying woe.
Everyone has a Laya, the universal soul.
But few benefit from it.
Like the moon, reflected in countless waves.
So how do we reach wisdom?
Search for the paths with a clean heart.
Discern the real from the false.
Head learning from soul wisdom.
Eye doctrine versus heart doctrine.
Ignorance is like a closed vessel, a caged bird.
Unable to sing or fly.
But even that's better than head learning without soul wisdom.
Okay, so we need both.
Breadth depth, and guiding principles.
Kneading to the diamond soul.
Soar beyond illusions to the eternal sat.
Don't trust your fancy.
The mind is a mirror that gathers dust.
Illusions?
We need the breeze of soul wisdom to clean it.
So blend mind and soul.
Shun ignorance and illusion.
Don't trust the senses.
Seek the eternal man within.
Realize thou art Buddha.
Don't let praise fool you.
The body is not the self.
Self-congratulation is a fool's tower,
False learning is rejected by the wise.
scattered by the good law.
I doctrine for the masses, heart doctrine for the elect.
Behold, I know, versus thus have I heard.
Humility over arrogance.
The great sifter is the heart doctrine,
Guided by karma.
grinding husks from the golden grain.
False learning from true knowledge.
Knead flour with Amrita, not husks with Maya's dew.
Nourishment for immortality, not death.
And becoming an arhan doesn't mean ceasing to love.
You don't have to stop caring about others.
You don't have to hate your family or renounce pity.
Those are the teachings of the Tirthakas.
The unbelievers.
Sin isn't born of action, nor bliss from inaction.
Deliverance comes from ceasing sin, not avoiding action.
That's the heart doctrine.
The I-Dharma is external, non-existent,
The heart dharma is bodhi, true wisdom.
permanent and everlasting.
Like a lamp with a clean wick and pure oil.
The flame doesn't feel the process of purification.
Action and inaction can coexist.
Like the tree's branches shaking, but the trunk remaining firm.
Active body, tranquil mind, clear soul.
Liberation doesn't come from seclusion, simple food, or self-mortification.
The Blessed Ones rejected those methods.
The Lion of the Law forsook selfish rest to teach.
Even after nirvana, he preached to all beings.
Sow kindness, reap its fruits.
Inaction in mercy is a sin.
You can't abstain your way to freedom.
Nirvana requires self-knowledge born of loving deeds.
Be patient. Don't fear failure.
Don't be attached to success.
Focus on your star.
Your planetary spirit.
Perseverance is eternal.
Personalities fade, the knower remains.
Sow merit for future peace.
Accept the woes of birth to make room for others.
Tears, water, pain bring forth karmic balance.
From life's furnace, purified flames rise.
Weaving the three vestures of the path.
Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya
The Shanga robe can buy eternal light,
lead to nirvana.
but it can kill compassion.
Buddhas in Dharmakaya can't help us.
So don't sacrifice others to yourself.
Or humanity to unit.
That's the open path of selfish bliss.
Rejected by the bodhisattvas of the secret heart.
First, live to benefit mankind.
Second, practice the 6 virtues.
Third, don the Nirmanakaya robe.
Renounce self-bliss for humanity's sake.
Fourth, renounce nirvana itself.
For the liberation of all beings.
That's the secret path of the Buddhas of perfection.
Sacrificing self for the weaker selves.
If the heart doctrine is too high, stay with the I doctrine.
There's always tomorrow.
The X rebirth.
No effort is wasted.
Harsh words return.
You can't grow roses from a pepper plant.
3 chances for tomorrow, today.
The great journey continues.
Rigid justice rules.
Karma brings weal or woe.
Accept your fate.
Act for others today, they'll act for you tomorrow.
The fruit of liberation comes from self-renunciation.
Don't be afraid to help.
Inaction from fear is evil.
Selfish devotion is a wasted life.
Follow the wheel of life.
Yeah.
Close your mind to pleasure and pain.
Exhaust karma, gain siddhis for the future.
If not the sun, be a planet.
Point the way, however dimly.
Look at Migmar and Lagpa,
Once bright Nyamas themselves.
now silent watchers.
The ups and downs of karma.
Give light to the pilgrim,
Find someone who knows less.
starving for wisdom.
Make pride the handmaid of devotion.
Cleave to existence with patience.
Follow the law.
Become a Srotapati in this life.
First step on the path.
Gain eagle sight, does hearing.
True devotion brings knowledge of past lives.
But diva sight and hearing take time.
Be humble for wisdom, humbler when you master it.
Like the ocean receiving all rivers, remaining unmoved.
Restrain the lower by the divine by the eternal.
Greater than the slayer of desire is the slayer of the knowledge of desire.
Don't let the lower pollute the higher.
Freedom is within. Beginning and end are outside the self.
The humble mother of rivers, unpraised by the Tirthaka.
The human form, empty to fools, full of Amrita to the wise.
The birthplace of sacred rivers is sacred ground.
He who has wisdom is honored by all.
Our